If we've been your job search besties and helped you in some way, there's a cool way you can support the show. Shout us a virtual coffee.
As an independent podcast, we couldn't do what we do without your support. Head to buymeacoffee.com/interviewboss.
If you keep us caffeinated, we'll keep the content coming. If you get diagnosed with the thing, you don't all of a sudden have that thing. You've already been living with the thing. You just have a name for it.
Wouldn't you prefer to know? You either have it or you don't have it.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Interview Boss. My name is Emma. I'm a radio journalist who's teamed up with my sister to give you advice, inspiration and support when you're looking for a new job. Sarah is a HR and recruitment professional, and together we're excited to give you all the tips, tricks and behind the scenes knowledge to help you in your career.
Hey Em, and welcome back everyone. We are always telling you guys to shoot your shot. So at the beginning of every episode, we tell you about a listener who's done exactly that. This ep, we're shouting out Helary, who bought us 5 coffees. Thank you for supporting the show.
She said, "Hi Emma and Sarah, I could not even begin to describe how incredible your advice has been in my job searches. I was happy in my role as research project manager in a smaller non-for-profit until they had a change in CEO a year ago. With this change, the workplace culture changed and it fast became a very toxic workplace. After experiencing repeated bullying at work, it became quickly apparent to me I needed to leave. That was when I jumped onto your podcast and listened to so many episodes while job searching. I landed on a role which was a lateral but seemingly strategic move into government. I was happy until they announced they'd be making rounds of redundancies because of budget cuts. I then had my manager call me to tell me that I would most likely be made redundant because they could make me redundant with no redundancy payment and hardly any notice period. I was devastated and feeling financially vulnerable, so I started job searching again less than 6 months after my last job search. Again, I tuned into your podcast and it kept me grounded in an unstable time with practical advice, particularly on thinking through deeply about best bits, but also with humour and sisterly banter. The wonderful thing about applying when the threat of redundancy was hanging over me was that I applied for a large variety of roles, and even ones that I felt were too much of a long shot. Well, one of the roles, which was too much of a long shot, came through to me with the opportunity for an interview. I then went to the interview with my best bits, which I spent hours on, and a few days later got the job offer. Not only did your advice help me find a job after a terrible time of financial insecurity and uncertainty, but I got a promotion into a role that pays me $40,000 more than my current role. In addition, my last 4 roles have been in the same pay grade, and finally I'm able to break the glass ceiling into my first people manager role. A huge thank you to you both. Your podcast is transformative and makes a huge difference. P.S. I love the episode. Listen to this right before the interview."
Oh my gosh, roller coaster. I also really love the idea that the desperation of redundancy is kind of why she landed the new job. Forced to shoot your shot. I love that.
Sometimes if you're comfortable in your role, you can be way too picky about what you'd be willing to leave with, but suddenly throw in a looming, scary, the prospect of redundancy, and that job isn't looking so bad.
Yep. And a massive pay rise, breaking that, next step of career progression. Incredible story. I love it.
Before we get into this episode, if you need more help than we can fit in a podcast, go check out our website for free templates, coaching services, and our interview academy. This week, we are tackling part 3 of our Neurodivergent series. We're talking all about disclosing neurodivergence. We've already tackled part 1 as a bit of an intro into the topic. We read out some questions that we'd been asked, talked about asking for accommodations in the job search. Then we did part 2, which was all about the practical tips and hacks to make the interview process easier for a different brain. And finally now, it's time to talk about disclosing.
Yes, one of the biggest questions that we had in all of our listener messages. Do you, don't you? We had a lot of stories from people. So we're kicking off with some listener stories, and I think we should take it in turns. Em, I will read the first one. These are anonymous from our listeners. So the first one says, It was a pleasant surprise to see the topic of this week's podcast as someone who's just recently been diagnosed with ASD level 2 and trying to navigate life with this diagnosis. It's come with many ups and downs, and I think the biggest struggle for me is advocating for myself, specifically in the workplace. I like to think people are more accepting of neurodivergence in the workplace, but that is far from what I've experienced, and the stigma is very much still there. My biggest struggles are advocating for myself in my current role. As part of getting a late diagnosis in adulthood, it's almost like you have to relearn yourself and rediscover who you are again. Part of this for me is finding ways to reduce cognitive load, overstimulation, and burnout. One of the main symptoms or strategies for women with ASD is masking. So another thing I struggle with is the fact that my disability is invisible, and from the outside it appears that I'm coping just fine, but in reality it's the complete opposite. I know you spoke about it in part 1 of the podcast, but I'm conflicted on whether to disclose my diagnosis when applying for new jobs and whether it will be used against me. You just are never sure how the person will take it on the other end of the application. Would it be used as a hindrance? Like, yes, I can do my job without accommodations currently, but I could be coping a lot better with accommodations in place.
Oh, so hard, and a decision that really weighs on people. We had another listener say, I took a really brave step and disclosed my diagnosis to my current employer and was met immediately with pushback and stigma. Managers and companies aren't educated on neurodivergence, especially in females. I was gaslit into being made to feel like to them I was doing fine and doing my job well, so I mustn't need accommodations. I'm now being treated differently because I've disclosed my disability and being treated like a criminal, being questioned on if I can meet the inherent requirements of my role, wanting me to fill out medical documentation. They are so uneducated and don't understand that my recent formal diagnosis of ASD does not represent a new condition or a change in my capacity. It's a lifelong neurodevelopment condition, and I have been performing the inherent requirements of my role at the company for many years with no performance concerns raised. My diagnosis has simply provided clarity and clinical insight into how I manage sensory input, cognitive load, and recovery. The worst of all is that I work in HR and my manager should be leading by example, not discriminating against me and treating me differently because of it. This is such a good point. This is something you have said to me before with random medical tests that I've had, completely irrelevant to this. But when you're having anxiety about what if the result's going to be positive and you might be diagnosed with this thing. And I remember you said to me once, if you get diagnosed with the thing, you don't all of a sudden have that thing. You've already been living with the thing. You just have a name for it.
Wouldn't you prefer to know? You either have it or you don't have it.
And that's so true. This listener's already been, killing it in their job, and it doesn't now change that they are suddenly incapable. It just means they understand their challenges, and if there's small tweaks that could make their life more bearable, why not get on board?
Yeah. It's tough. I think sharing these stories at the beginning is such a great way to kick off this episode because it really puts into perspective the advice that we're about to give. So another listener said, I'm a late diagnosed ADHDer. Well, me too. With combined type, but now with the added bonus of perimenopause. Holy cow.
Oh, thinking of you.
Oh my gosh.
Thinking of you.
Hormones plus ADHD. It's brutal just during regular monthly cycles, let alone perimenopause, let alone menopause. Oh my gosh. And then they said, I'd love to share my listener story with you. In my most recent unsuccessful second interview, I felt safe enough to disclose my neurodiversity and it was well received. But I'm on the fence about going public, although I've been looking for work for a year now. So I want to own why, be transparent and be real. Oh, I love that. Made up their mind about wanting to disclose, I want to do this, maybe just needs a bit of help as to how.
Another listener chimed in with a bit of a slightly different situation. It relates more to health issues, but it's still on the topic of disclosing, so we thought it was relevant. They said, what I'd love your help with is navigating questions in job interviews that help me gain insight as to whether or not a company can support my health issues, but not outright disclose this information to people or interviewers that I don't know and who might choose not to hire me based on their own assumptions of my capabilities. That is tricky.
Yes. Yeah. Another listener said, what should you do if you feel like your disability is affecting you in an interview? I'm autistic with sensory processing disorder and coordination disorder. Although I'm great at what I do, I often feel like interviewers view me negatively due to how I use nonverbals or move. I usually get the job after virtual interviews for this reason. However, this opportunity is becoming less common. Should you disclose a disability in a job interview, even if you feel like you don't need accommodations to do the job? So that sets the stage, right? Like lots of different types of situations there and people kind of feeling differently about do I, don't I? Now, the reality is that if you know us, you know that we're not going to come on here and say, this is exactly what you need to do. Follow these steps and nothing will go wrong, because that's not how the world works. But we're going to give you plenty of things to consider and plenty of tips so that you can apply what you want to do and work out how to move forward.
Yeah, so let's go through the benefits of disclosing. Obviously, the big one is it helps other people better understand you, and that could mean improved working relationships or just being able to perform better at your job, or just happier, more comfortable, just feeling free, being authentic.
Yeah. You could get ahead of any assumptions that people might make about you. So particularly that listener that talked about the way that they use nonverbals and that they move, and that is something that they know that people are potentially picking up on. What might be going through those interviewers' heads if they don't understand or they don't have a reason that they can attribute to that? They might be thinking, are they distracted? Do they want to be here? Like there could be all different assumptions depending on what those behaviours are. So if you're able to clarify that, sometimes you can just get rid of that grey area.
Yeah, and also get access to accommodations that might be relevant. And this isn't just in the interview process, but in the actual job as well. Maybe you're allowed to work from home, or you get to start work later because that's how your body clock operates.
Sit in a different part of the office so that it's a little bit quieter for you. Like they don't have to be really large things that really affect, how your role normally operates. There might be fairly small changes that might make a real big difference to you.
Being able to share things openly with your team, that's a big one. Even just in small talk or conversation, just being open.
And I think this is something that people may not always think about, but you could share it with your colleagues and your team members. If you have work friends, if you kind of trust them to go, hey, I don't really want to tell this formally to my boss, but happy to chat about it with you, who's my, work bestie. And I think the things that come to mind for me are just the practical stuff. Like I like to just share things in general. And if I was saying, oh, hold on, I've got to duck out of this meeting because I need to grab my medication or something, like if I'm ADHD and medicated, versus having to hide that and going, oh, I just need to take that. Like you're kind of ducking away. You don't want people to know that you're taking medication. What's it for? They're going to ask questions. You haven't told anyone. Like it means that you're kind of living this life of going, oh, I can't explain what appointment I've got. I can't explain, like there just might be bits of your life. Yeah, that you're like, oh, I'm listening to this podcast. Oh, I can't really tell you what it's about because that might give you a clue as to why I'm listening to it.
Yeah. What about the benefits of legal protection?
Yeah, I read this on a couple of articles that I kind of looked at on like, what are other people saying about this? And I guess most jurisdictions, most countries would kind of have some kind of disability discrimination or equal opportunity protection. And so I guess you could kind of think about it like if they were to terminate you from your role because you disclosed or because you had a protected characteristic, a protected disability, then you could do something about that. Obviously, if they don't know that you have that thing, then they can't have made the decision to terminate you because of that thing. Does that kind of make sense? Like, so if you don't share it with anyone, I think it's difficult to kind of share that afterwards because how could they have discriminated against you if they didn't know? Anyway, I didn't think this was like a really large point or a huge thing for people to think about, but it might be relevant in your area. I mean, we all know that regardless of the protection that you might technically, officially, legally have, there's a big difference between that and how things play out. And we are all about practical reality here. We're not talking about the world that we wish exists. We're talking about the real one. And we know that companies will often find a way to say, oh, well, it's actually about, your performance. It's got nothing to do with what you just shared with us recently and try and find ways to get around it. So I don't think this is a slam dunk.
Yeah, they're not going to put their hand up and go, yeah, we did discriminate based on that. Like, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Now, onto the downsides. Unfortunately, there still is a lot of stigma about many of these conditions, a bit of a misunderstanding. Maybe some awkwardness could come up too if the person doesn't know how to respond or what to say and feel a bit uncomfortable not knowing how
they don't know how to treat you.
Yeah. If they feel like they need to treat you differently now.
They're kind of like, oh, is that okay with you? Is that okay if you come to this thing? Like, it just might be if they're being almost like nice, but almost too sensitive about it. And you're going, it's not a big deal. I'm the same person that I was before. You don't have to treat me so differently. And they're like, oh, well, you wouldn't want to come because it'll probably be loud. And it's like, there might be assumptions that they're making, even if they're trying to do the right thing.
To protect you, yeah.
Yeah. There might be assumptions about your capabilities, what you can and can't do. It's what all of our listeners have shared in their stories is the reactions that they've got, all the fears that they have. I think everybody knows these things.
So let's talk about the timing of disclosing if you are going to do it. Are there times that aren't ideal that you should probably avoid if you can?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different things to think about, and I don't think any of these are black and white. But the first one I would say is, live in person in your interview in front of the panel. There's nothing wrong with that. I just think, is that the ideal scenario? Is that the ideal timing? Are you able to deliver it in a way that works for you? In some cases, that might be actually really perfect. Like, for example, our listener who talked about, I want to be really open and transparent and I want to own it. Like maybe actually she works it into her intro. Tell me about yourself. Like, hey, this is a thing and this is what I'm dealing with and whatever. But if you're kind of treating it like, here's something I'm sharing with you, here's how it affects me, here's the accommodations I'd like, I just think that that's such a formal back and forth conversation. And there might be panel members who don't really need to know, like the extra person that they got to sit in from a different department, like probably just doesn't need to know, even if you wanted to disclose. So that's one time that you might want to rethink. There's also, I think, in response to negative feedback. So maybe you find out that you didn't go to the next round of interviews or that you weren't offered the job and you've been given some feedback. If you responded to that and said, oh, well, those things that you've mentioned, it's because of my ADHD, it's because of my autism, it's because of this diagnosis, I don't think that is helpful because it kind of feels like, well, you weren't prepared to tell me until there were reasons that you didn't get the job and now it comes out. Like we can't go back and reassess. I don't know. I don't think that is an ideal timing.
Would this also apply if you're not looking for a new job, you're disclosing within your current job and maybe you've been spoken to because a project, wasn't great or something got missed and they're trying to share that. And then I can see how this would happen because maybe if it had been on your mind for a while, it's been weighing on you and then something like this happens and you feel like it's all come to a head and it just kind of comes out. But it might not be received as well in that moment when they're already trying to get their point across and then you're trying to hit back with a defensive kind of mechanism. I think holding space for them to have their point and say what they need to say and then coming back in a neutral meeting to say your part would be more ideal.
And I think this isn't a no. None of these are really no's. It's just a maybe pause about how you go about it. If you're like, okay, it's bad timing, I have gotten some negative feedback, but I do want to disclose because I think it's going to help us have this conversation about how I can improve. You just have to be more conscious about how you're presenting that. It shouldn't be, well, it's because of this. That's why I can't do that. Oh, well, this person misinterpreted me and that's why they made a complaint. And it's because I have this thing and this symptom or whatever. I think if you're defensive and you're pointing to it as an excuse and that's the end of the sentence, I don't think that works. Again, I think our listeners know this stuff. I don't think this is going to be news to anyone. I don't think anyone's listening to this going, yay, I'd love to use it as an excuse. I just think even if you're trying to use it as like an explanation to give an additional context on why that might have happened or where that came from, it may not be received super well in that moment, particularly if it's a more formal conversation and like a formal discussion that you're having or a formal issue that's come up. I think those are probably the worst times.
Yeah. And also immediately after you've been diagnosed, I think it's good to sit with it first.
Yeah, I wrote this, again, that none of these are no's. You can do this if you want. I just think potentially take a beat. I know what it's like being late diagnosed. And if that's you, there's a lot going on. It's emotional. and it feels to you like everything's changed and that this explains everything. Everything about you and your life you can understand on a deeper level with this information. It's just that that's not always the case for other people. It feels that way for you internally, but I found even just sharing with friends and family that I was like, oh, well, it explains this and this and this. And I was just getting them being like, okay, like you're the same person to them that you were the other day. Like nothing has changed on their end. And so I think sometimes if you've just recently been diagnosed, you can be kind of excited and you want to share and you want to go, hey, this explains why I do X or why I struggle with Y. It's just that you're probably still understanding it yourself. You're probably not as good at explaining it. I certainly have found, 4 years later, that I am much more prepared and better able to explain, okay, this is my diagnosis, this is how it shows up for me in a work context, and this is what I do for it, this is how you can help me. Like, because it's taken me a while to sink in and see some more patterns and understand it better and have that simmer down a bit. And then what if you get a bad reaction? You're probably quite pleased with this diagnosis, or at least feeling like it's very validating. And what if you get that reflected back?
Yeah, it's too vulnerable of a time.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly it. Good summary.
So there are different ways that you can do it and do what feels right for you. But overall, the goal is not just to share that you have X condition. It's to give insight into how that manifests for you, how it shows up at work, how it doesn't affect you, what you do to manage it, and how your team or your manager can help, things that are triggering. I don't like being interrupted. I don't do well with the noise and chatter. Or I forget, if you ask me a verbal question, can you send it in an email because I have a bad memory? Or
like I will often write things down because I might have a tendency to forget. So if I'm, writing notes in meetings, it's not because I'm not paying attention. Like they don't always have to be like, here's all these negative things and that's because of this thing. Like I think you want to try and unpack it for whoever you're sharing. And when we say like different ways to do it, and this is the overall goal, you don't have to explicitly share what your diagnosis is whatsoever. I think the really fun thing about inclusivity in general and a lot of these kind of more modern inclusive ways of doing things is that it's kind of just good for everyone. Let me give you an example. I've read about various different workplaces that are really neurodivergent friendly. And one that comes to mind did this thing where everyone in their team would share with everyone else in their team like a get to know me kind of a cheat sheet on that person. Here's what I like, here's what I don't like, here's when I work best, here's the types of things that I enjoy doing, here's what I'm good at, here's what my role involves, like just some stuff. I can't remember exactly what was and wasn't on it, but I can't think of like a single team or area where that wouldn't be helpful. Regardless of whether you're neurodivergent or not, just knowing that, hey, like your colleague Carol over there is a real morning person. Maybe try not to invite her to a 4:30 p.m. meeting on a Friday. Like she's going to be worn out for the week and you may not get the best out of her. Or, hey, this person really doesn't like it when you surprise them with stuff. They prefer to be able to dig into the detail beforehand with an email and then come to the meeting really prepared. Like all of that stuff doesn't necessarily have to do with any diagnosis. It might, but that information is just helpful in general for your team. And so if you're listening to this and you're not sure whether you do or don't want to formally disclose, I think you can have a very similar conversation. In one version, you're sharing, I have this formal diagnosis and in the other version, you're just sharing, here's what you need to know about me and how I work. Here's some of the things that you might notice. Here's what really helps me do my best. Here's what, I don't react so well to. When I'm under stress, this is what it might look like. When there's too much going on, I might start to get really antisocial. It's not personal. It's just sometimes what I do when I have to try and focus. Like these are some of the ways that you might be able to explain and share. And I think what that does is it helps us try and get at some of those benefits of being understood, getting ahead of any assumptions, trying to get your team to understand you and maybe accommodate you in certain ways, like sending you the email beforehand or not interrupting you when you're in the middle of something or whatever it might be. But you can, if you want to, skip the negative assumptions and misunderstanding because you're not just making big sweeping statements about, I have this thing. and letting them fill in the blanks.
And I can't do this, or
yeah, you're specifying, for me, this is what it looks like, because
it kind of reminds me of when we talk about knowing yourself and knowing like your weaknesses. If they ask you your weakness, you don't want to just say, oh, for me as a journalist, I'm really bad with numbers, and so I can't report on any statistic or math type news stories. It's that you say, yeah, I struggle with numbers. Here's how I get around it. I always double check. I ask a colleague, I still can do it. It's kind of showing like, these are my struggles. Here's what I've found works. Here's what I've found doesn't work. You're kind of presenting your science experiment that you've done.
Yeah. And then if that person, like, let's say you had shared that, and it may or may not be tied to a diagnosis, like it could be just tied to dyslexia. And like when you're reading the news, like the numbers in particular are getting jumbled up or whatever. If you shared that, but you also shared all the ways that you're dealing with it and things, and your boss knew about that, and then one day on the news they heard you make a mistake with a number, do you think that they're more likely to be a bit understanding? Again, regardless of whether they know that it's a diagnosis or not, they're like, oh yeah, Emma does struggle with that. They might still have a word to you about it, but it's something that you're both already aware of and you can continue the conversation on. I really like this idea of just sharing the practicalities. I think that can give you, first of all, to make an actual, explicit disclosure more powerful and more useful, but also you could do an indirect disclosure to just say, hey, here's the things that work for me. Here's what makes me a good team member. Here's some of the things that are me at my worst, so that we can all be on the same page about it.
Yeah. It's kind of a sneaky tactic. You can get your point across without having to have a big kind of coming out moment, if you will. Interview Academy might be the perfect thing you're looking for. Interview Academy is a course Sarah has been working on after delivering hundreds of interview coaching sessions and getting incredible results.
But unfortunately, I'm only one gal living in an Aussie time zone who works a day job, and all of that mean I can't help everyone one-on-one, which drove me crazy.
So for over a year, Sarah's been working on turning all of those amazing lessons into an on-demand, step-by-step interview prep course. We hold your hand through the entire thing,
and you can do it at home in your own time and get instant access right now. Check it out at interviewboss.com.au/interview-academy. The link is in the show notes.
So tell me about our options for disclosing, timing-wise.
Yep. So I kind of think, for the purposes of this podcast and what we do here at Interview Boss, I kind of think there's pre-interview, during the interview, or after you start, and plenty more options in all of those things. But if we stick to those three categories, let's do a couple of examples of what this actually might sound like. So pre-interview, you might send an email, like you might share a note. You could do this over the phone if you were chatting to a recruiter or something, but you might do it in an email. And if you did that, here's what you could say. I wanted to share a quick note ahead of the interview to help set us up for the best conversation possible. I'm autistic, and whilst this doesn't impact my ability to do the role, it can sometimes influence how I come across in interviews. For example, I might take a moment to think before answering, be quite direct or concise in my responses, use fewer nonverbal cues like eye contact or facial expressions. I wanted to flag this in advance so that these differences aren't misinterpreted as a lack of interest or preparation. I'm very engaged and excited about the opportunity. I just tend to communicate a little differently. If it's helpful, I'm always happy to ask for clarification or provide additional detail if something feels really brief. I appreciate you taking this into account, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
That's lovely, and such a chill, simple email.
Yeah, isn't it? Now, I know people, define I have autism, I am autistic, use your own kind of terminology and how you prefer to refer to yourself. But I think what you're doing in particular there is for our listeners who talked about being judged specifically in the interview. I actually looked up some research on this because I love a peer-reviewed study and being a science girly at heart. And there is actually quite a bit of research on how quickly people make judgments on someone who might be neurodivergent. It's like 15 seconds or something. I should have got the paper in front of me so that I can actually refer to it. I'll link it in the show notes. I'll find the particular paper that I had a look at. But yeah, it's really fast that without the formal information of knowing anything, people are able to tell something is a bit different about that person very, very quickly, which is like kind of impressive, kind of horrifying, kind of, I don't know how to feel about it. But if you are aware that that might be you and you go, look, I want people to understand how that shows up for me, because if you, particularly eye contact or facial expressions, if you tend to be kind of, straight-faced and not have a lot of tone in your voice as well, like a variation in tone, that could be interpreted, if they're thinking, hey, this person is neurotypical, that could be interpreted as lack of interest or they don't want to be here. But if they have this additional information and you've gone out of your way to say, I am enthusiastic about the role, you may not see that in the same way as you would for someone else. I think that could really help.
Yeah. Now, how about during the interview, if you go the explicit route?
I think you can do this, as we talked about, as part of your intro and you'll tell me about yourself. I would do it kind of at the end when you're talking about what you're looking for next. You could share like a little bit about me and say, I like this, I'm good at this. And then also recently I've been diagnosed with XYZ and that's helped me understand why I do blah, blah, blah. And it's helped me put in strategies in place to help me with XYZ. I think that works really well. I think that can feel really authentic. You might want to say right at the beginning of the interview, again, I kind of included this as like a maybe not, because this probably does feel the most like, disclaimer to the whole panel, like most awkward. I would be probably least likely to do something like this, I would say, but here it is. Before we get into it, I just wanted to mention I have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and sometimes that means I might take a moment before answering or come across a little bit direct. I like to flag that just so that it's not misunderstood. I'm really excited to be here.
Lovely. And indirect?
Yeah, you might say, look, I just wanted to share I am really excited and also really nervous to be here in this interview. I can tend to take a moment to think before answering questions just so that I can give a considered response. And sometimes I've been known to be a little bit direct. If you need me to elaborate, please feel free to ask follow-up questions.
Perfect.
You're just sharing with them like, hey, here's me. Here's some stuff about me that might help you facilitate this conversation.
And a lot of people who are nervous, that doesn't really give off, oh, this person has a condition. It could just seem like, oh, they're just a bit nervous and interviews are unnatural and they're just flagging that they're going to take their time. So, yeah.
That's right. You can give the detail of like, what are the things that it's impacting or what are the things that you notice. I think you can even do that with stuff that's really specific, which leads us into our third kind of period of time that you have as an opportunity to share, which is after you start. And so I think you can do this explicitly or indirectly, either or. I don't necessarily have scripts for this one because there's so many different variations of how this might happen. But if you wanted to kind of share indirectly, it would sound like some of the other examples that we'd had where you're kind of giving information about how this shows up for you.
To me, doing it after you start feels the safest. Am I right in that? Because it's like you've got the job, they can't discriminate against you, you kind of got through the interview, but now I guess accommodations matter in both processes, but it's almost like it's more valuable to have long-term accommodations in the role that you're going to be doing every day compared to a one-off interview. Even though I know you need them in the interview to be able to get the job, it's a whole thing.
Yeah. Well, some people might need them in the interview and some people might not. Remember, a lot of our listeners at the beginning in their submissions said, I don't even really need accommodations. It's just that maybe they could help and that I think this is something that I might be interested in sharing. So it's not that like there's a burning need to do it. There's just a question mark of like, hey, I feel like this could help and it could help me unlock some stuff. It could help me be better in my job, like we talked about in the benefits. It's not like you're unable to cope without accommodations, but hey, if people knew these things, it might make everything a lot easier and everyone would be happier. I think you can go for like right after you start if you wanted to, but you could also kind of like test the waters, suss it out a little bit, just like see how the job feels in general. Like you might also, if you're in that boat of not necessarily needing accommodations super upfront straight away, day one, you might feel like, well, in this particular workplace, what is going to be helpful. Like if you're someone, for example, who really struggles to concentrate when there's lots of noise and lots of people talking at the same time, you might have just started in a really quiet office And so that's actually not even something that would even be helpful because it's not even a problem here. Like versus you might have started in a really busy office. And so that's something that you might like to kind of notice in that first couple of weeks or first couple of months to say, okay, well, if I was to talk to my boss about this, this is something that I might like to share. And again, I think even that you could do without formally disclosing if you wanted to. You could share, hey, I'm finding that it's really hard to concentrate on my coworkers. Sometimes I find that I just can't tune out, the voices of everyone else around me. Do you think it'd be possible for me to swap seats and sit over there instead? Because I think that'd be a bit further away from, the kitchen noise or like whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to come with, this is my diagnosis. I kind of like the idea that, let's say your boss was like really positive and open, but you just didn't want to share the formal thing. I like the idea that all the things that you were sharing with them would have them being like, coming to you, being like, Sarah, look, this might be overstepping, but have you ever considered looking into this? Some of the things that you've shared with me, just could be worth exploring for you. I love the idea that like you're giving them all the information and if they're clever enough and switched on, they might connect the dots.
Or on the other way, like if you have a boss that's giving the whole, like not pretending, I hate to say this, but it exists, the type that's like, we didn't have all this back in my day, and you just know that that's kind of the approach. And it's like, no, we did. But anyway, maybe you're asking for accommodations without naming it. And you're like, hey, it's just so loud and distracting in here. Can I sit over there? And they're like, of course, of course. And they think it's all so reasonable. There's no label on it, but really you're kind of reverse psychology hacking them into giving you the accommodations without naming it.
Yes, and that segues perfectly into the point, I think, of all of this idea of giving extra information about what you need and why it helps and just sharing is because it allows you to skip the part where you're hoping that, hey, sharing this word, ADHD, or sharing autism spectrum disorder, or sharing dyslexia, or whatever it is, that they automatically are going to know what that means. I mean, think about the process that you go through after diagnosis or even in the lead up to diagnosis, how much you have to learn about what it actually looks like. If someone hasn't gone through that or they don't know many people or whatever, they're not going to have any idea what that kind of looks like. And for that person, that horrible boss who's like, we didn't have that in my day, and you're like, I am not telling them while I'm in this workplace. Even if you did tell them, it actually wouldn't probably help because they wouldn't have any idea what that meant. They would have these crazy preconceived ideas about like, yeah, but you can talk to people. No, you're not. I don't know who's diagnosed. Like they might not even, whereas if you share, hey, I find it really hard to keep up when you're giving me lots of instructions at a time. Do you think you could maybe break them down and do them one by one? Like they might be able to better understand that as just coming from you. It would almost be confusing to them to be like, oh, the reason I struggled with that is because of my diagnosis, because to them, those two things aren't related. That's the point that I'm making badly is sometimes you have to connect the dots of like, what does that actually mean? Because even if you shared, this is my diagnosis, they wouldn't understand why that affects anything in your role maybe.
Yeah. And of course, every person is different. So saying the name of the diagnosis isn't enough to elicit understanding and help. You have to do the kind of processing to be specific about what it is that would help you.
Yeah, it's like if you had someone in your team share, oh, I've just been diagnosed with ASD level 2, and you just handed them a pair of noise cancelling headphones. It's like, well, that might not be helpful, or that might not be what they need actually at all. It's like such an assumption. So yeah, I think there's lots of different ways and we can't make the call for you. But I would love to hear how it goes. If you do or don't disclose, you have tips or advice, share them with us. We would love to hear about it. Thanks for listening to Interview Boss. If you want to request an episode on your specific conundrum or industry, send us the details. Email us or slide into our Instagram DMs. But if you DM us on Instagram and you're not following, Emma won't be happy and she will judge you.
I really will.
We believe in paying it forward, so if we've helped you, please spread the word. You know the drill. Follow, like, share, review. Find us on Instagram and LinkedIn. It all really helps. Or you could go the old school way and tell someone else about the show. Can you believe we started Interview Boss in 2021?
Not really. It's insane. That's a lot of episodes and a lot of hours of talking.
Oh my gosh, it is. And if you're scrolling through all of our episodes, you might scroll straight past something that you really, really needed.
Yes, we're always getting messages from people asking us to do an episode on something, and I'm like, we already have.
So we've put together playlists to help you find the episodes that are exactly what you need, suited to your situation.
They're all categorized. If you're applying for jobs, we have episodes about resumes, cover letters, job ads. If you've been offered your dream job, we have episodes on resigning, exit interviews, and how to impress at your new company.
And we even have a very special playlist that's very popular for if you have an interview coming up immediately and you need just our most recommended hard-hitting episodes between now and then.
For all our last-minute listeners. It's all there for you. You can browse by category and check out all the playlists at interviewboss.com.au/podcast.